And just to remind our viewers, in January, a state of emergency was declared in Colombia when guerrilla violence killed 100 people. And as you saw in that report in June, there was the assassination attempt on Senator and presidential hopeful Miguel Uribe Turbay. The 15-year-old suspect said he did it for the money. So what to make of this recent surge in violence as a country has recently enjoyed years of relative calm? Joining us from Medellin is Nicholas Morgan, a lecturer in Latin American studies at Newcastle University. Hello to you, Nicholas. Just first question, is there a concern there in Colombia that the situation is perhaps spiraling out of control?
Well, to see these kinds of scenes is, of course, deeply disturbing in Colombia. There are many scars around these kinds of issues. And in the wake of the peace process with the FARC, a lot of people began to believe that, there was a possibility that these things could definitively be consigned to the past. But when these things emerge again, then of course they bring up a whole range of really deep-seated feelings about the country and its long-standing issues with political violence. But of course, I think right now this is a very different situation we're living through than the situation that we were living through in the period of the main conflict between the Colombian state and the FARC.
Yeah, but it seems that the anti-government guerrillas have grown stronger under Gustavo Petro's 3 years in office. Why is that?
It's a really good question. And I think as well, we need to think that, there's a kind of nexus of violent actors in Colombia right now. It's not just it's not the dissidents of the FARC alone. It's also the ELN. And it's also the so-called Autodefensas Gaitanistas de Colombia, who many see as a kind of offshoot of the old right-wing paramilitaries. They're a slightly different organization. But I think there are a series of factors here. I mean, one of them is that the Petro government really made a big deal out of what it called seeking total peace, which was, an attempt to negotiate with all of these groups. And to bring out a demobilization of all violent actors in Colombia, which, of course, is a really admirable goal. But the way that has been carried out has been really problematic, I think. Ceasefires have been declared without real commitments on the other side. And I think one of the main issues is that there's been a lack of understanding of what's really going on right now with these groups. I mean, there are few incentives for them to actually seek to make peace right now. On one hand, economically, they're doing incredibly well. There is so much illegal money around in the Colombian economy right now. Coca prices, which had dropped, have now gone back up. So cocaine, remains a lucrative driver of a lot of this violence, and the control of cocaine routes, etc. Regardless of the kind of ideological claims of some of these groups, what's really driving the whole kind of conflict is money, of course. So there's the cocaine issue. Gold prices are now really high again, and there's a lot of illegal mining going on. And with the Donald Trump administration's approach to, migration, people trafficking across the border into Panama is also a really lucrative source of funds for these illegal organizations. So they've done very well. They've also, yes, they have expanded in a really dramatic fashion. It's hard, of course, to tell, if you look at the figures, well, the figures you have to take with a pinch of salt. But Ariel Avila, who's a, Alianza Verde senator, he was saying that, Colombia has 1,100 municipalities, right? 1,100 local town areas. At the time of the Juan Manuel Santos government, the Estado Mayor Central, the people who've been, accused by the state of carrying out these recent attacks, were present in 56 of those. And the Ivan Duque, that reached something like 123. And now, according to Avila, they're in around 180 municipalities. And if you actually look at the Defensoría del Pueblo, the Human Rights Ombudsman Office, they would calculate something far higher, somewhere in the region of 300. So we're talking about these groups being present, and that particular group being present in over a quarter of Colombia's municipalities. And that's deeply problematic. And of course, part of this is that the security side of the government's approach has not been particularly strong.
Yeah, that's
If you go back to the piece,
just a step in, I wanted to ask you about that. Some of the criticism has been that the Colombian intelligence isn't up to the task. Is that what this is pointing to?
it could potentially be that. I think it's also a question of priorities. If we go back to the period of negotiations with the FARC, well, essentially they negotiated surrender because the costs of the war were too much for them to bear. The constant strikes against their leadership, etc., were deeply destabilizing for that organization. Now, right now, we've got organizations which have got very well entrenched bases across the border in Venezuela. And we don't have the kind of constant military offensives against the armed groups that we did have in the past. I mean, that's not to say that there's been no military action. There has. I mean, Petro would say that, the recent outrage in Cali, it was a really appalling attack, right, using cylinder bombs, such indiscriminate weapons, that was a kind of reprisal for army successes in decommissioning over 250,000 rounds of ammunition, et cetera, et cetera. But what's clear is, yes, I mean, intelligence successes were really important in those previous strikes against the guerrilla leadership, as were simple things like paying people money to turn them in. So yes, I mean, there's definitely been a shift of emphasis under this administration, and a lot of people, particularly those on the right of the political spectrum, will be pointing the finger at the Petro regime and saying that they bear the blame. Yeah, not something that I would really share, but you can see the way it's going.
And regardless whether it's the right spectrum or perhaps someone else, next year we know Petro will be out of office. There's a presidential election. Petro has hit his term limits. We don't know who will replace him, but we know it won't be him. So how is this shaping the discourse or the campaigning in the country?
Well, something that we're probably familiar with is that when you have a kind of, let's put it like this, it's the first time that Colombia has had a kind of center-left president. There's been a relentless campaign against his administration by the mainstream media, which, obviously respond to the interests of Colombia's elite groups, if you like. So that's been one issue. So that regardless of any of its successes, and there have been some, the image of the regime has been presented as, something which is a complete failure. And I think for many people on the right, it had to be done. It had, the Petro regime had to be shown to be a failure, right? And the way things are kind of playing out, it's hard. Well, we don't know yet who any potential progressive successor to Petro would be. There are many problems about who that person would be. Would they have, enough traction across the political spectrum? We just don't know at this point. But I would say that it's extremely difficult for there to be a kind of successor to the Petro government, given the constant atmosphere of critique of this kind of administration. But I've been proved very wrong in the past on France 24, so I don't want to bet on it.
All right. Well, Nicholas, we'll bring you back to the program to maybe check up on those predictions. Thank you very much for your time, Nicholas Morgan, joining us from Medellin.